We tend to think of weapons as being pretty brutal objects, things that are designed for one purpose only, inflicting maximum damage. For some people, that's exactly what makes them so appealing. But not all weapons are created equal. Some get straight to the point, while others take a little more finesse or effort to deploy. Throughout history, there have been plenty of different types of weaponry used by countless cultures and eras. Some were more effective than others. Some had a very specific use, and some were just plain weird. These are the weirdest weapons ever used. From household items turned makeshift tools of death to bizarre creations you won't believe anyone ever made. Welcome back, everyone. I'm your host, here with a look at the strangest ways humans have ever dispatched their enemies. First up is a weapon that may be hiding in your kitchen right now, the humble spatula. In case you didn't know, spatulas have been around since ancient Greece and originally looked a lot like a gladiator's sword. They've come a long way since then, but their original shape had some obvious benefits. A flat, flexible blade could scrape food off pottery without damaging it, which was important before disposable plates were invented. This design also meant that it could double as a basic weapon in a pinch, which might have been useful when you were preparing dinner for 8 people and one of them happened to be a homicidal maniac with a taste for human flesh. That particular scenario is from Asterix and Cleopatra, where Obelix accidentally hits a Roman soldier with a spatula after mistaking him for a chicken. Although it probably wouldn't kill anyone, it could do some serious damage if used repeatedly, and we know from other historical sources that this weapon did see some actual use, thanks to an account from the Battle of Karansebs in 1784. When the Austrian army attacked, the defending Turks responded by hurling spatulas at them, causing such terror among the horses that they broke ranks and fled. It was only later that someone realized the saboteurs were simply stable hands trying to defend their homes. But for a weapon that can actually kill, let's turn to the kitchen knife. You'll find these in almost every home. And it's hard to imagine a more mundane object. And yet, throughout history, people have devised many ways to use them as deadly weapons. There's the classic stabbing motion, of course, but there's also the less common flying knife throw. This technique has appeared in countless films and TV shows, often depicted as a form of ninja magic. But its roots actually go back much further, to the Mongol armies of Genghis Khan. They would use sharp knives and even arrowheads tied to lengths of string, swing them over their heads, and hurl them at their enemies. While these weapons weren't technically knives, the principle was the same, and it could catch opponents off guard. Because most people you won't expect to be killed by a projectile weapon, unless it is hurled at them by a giant metal contraption on wheels. So it was probably pretty terrifying to see a whirling blade coming toward you attached to nothing but a piece of string. And it wasn't limited to the Mongols. Knife throwing was used by many other cultures across the world and persists to this day, with some modern practitioners capable of hitting targets well over 100 feet away. Another common tool is the sickle, which farmers have used for millennia to cut crops. Its curved blade and long handle make it a fairly effective weapon as well, although it has a reputation for being tricky to use, thanks to its appearance in French Revolution propaganda that showed peasants brandishing sickles against aristocrats. It became known as the peasant's sword, but it never caught on as a common weapon. For one thing, the long blade is relatively fragile and requires a strong arm to wield properly. But, perhaps more importantly, it doesn't have much of a reach advantage, unlike other and since it was primarily associated with one social class, it didn't have much prestige compared to more martial weapons. But few objects have been turned into weapons quite like the umbrella. While some umbrellas can have sharp metal spikes on their tips for protection against thieves, they're mostly harmless. Yet people have found many ways to use them as weapons, whether by stabbing with the pointed tip or hitting an opponent over the head. Their thin construction means they don't inflict much damage, but they can still be surprisingly effective at keeping attackers at bay, until you get a chance to escape. Of course, those with bad intentions could use umbrellas for nefarious purposes, such as in 1964, when Malcolm X was assassinated by members of his own organization. One of the attackers fired 3 shots from a .32 caliber pistol hidden inside an umbrella, proving that sometimes it's best to have one up your sleeve for something a bit more lethal. Though, we have to move on to another common object, the ballpoint pen. Invented in the 19th century, This device made writing with ink more convenient. No more having to dip your quill into an ink bottle and clean it afterward. Now you could just write with a pen and put it away without worrying about spilling anything. But despite its simple design, it's also a fairly effective weapon, especially when you consider how cheap and easy they are to conceal. During the Cold War, spies carried them in their briefcases, and a single flick of the wrist could dispatch a target swiftly and silently. One famous case was the assassination of Bulgarian dissident Georgy Markov in 1978. He was approached by a woman on a London street who jabbed him in the leg with an umbrella-mounted ballpoint pen rigged with a tiny poison dart. The attack went unnoticed for a time, but Markov soon fell gravely ill and died 4 days later. An autopsy revealed the cause, a small pellet containing the poison ricin, which was undetectable once inside the body. To this day, no one knows for sure who was behind the murder, but the weapon was an ingenious piece of Speaking of espionage, few weapons are more iconic than the classic sniper rifle used by soldiers and assassins alike to eliminate high-value targets from afar. Originally developed in the late 19th century as a big game hunting rifle, the Winchester Model 1894 was one of the first commercially successful live-action rifles, and in 1980, it was adapted for military use as the M1907. As its name suggests, it fires bullets from a magazine held at a fixed angle, allowing for rapid fire. At the time, this was considered revolutionary technology, and in the decades since, it's become ubiquitous on the battlefields of countless conflicts. For a sniper, it's a useful tool for taking out a target without getting too close, but it does require some skill to use effectively, something that was brought to the forefront during the Vietnam War. After American forces were ambushed by Viet Cong soldiers, it became apparent that new tactics were needed. Enter the Green Berets, a special forces unit trained in guerrilla warfare, who use weapons like the M14 rifle to fight back. They proved highly effective and inspired a new generation of special forces operators who are still in service today. Another weapon with deep roots in history is the mace, a blunt weapon consisting of a central pole with spiked balls attached. Sometimes it's in the form of a solid sphere, as in the medieval mace, but other times it's hollow. Either way, the mace has been used for centuries as a simple but effective weapon. For one thing, its range gives users an advantage over most other weapons. And for another, the spiked exterior can inflict massive damage to bones and internal organs alike. This has made it a favorite among the ranks of heavy infantry who relied on brute force to win battles. But there are limits to any weapon, and the mace is no exception. Against a shield wall, its effectiveness can be diminished, which is why cavalrymen often preferred to use spears instead. With enough force, the mace could break through shields and deliver crushing blows. But by the Renaissance era, armor had become much more sophisticated, and the mace was largely superseded by firearms. Still, it remains popular among fantasy fans and has even seen some modern use as a ceremonial weapon. But for something with a bit more pizzazz, you can't beat the chainsaw. Sure, it looks impressive in action movies and video games, but how effective is it really? Well, plenty of people have tried it out firsthand and given it mixed reviews. Pro tip: avoid the electric model in wet conditions. Unless you're planning to complete the circuit yourself, it can be used as a melee weapon, but it's more useful for taking down obstacles and creating cover, as well as silencing a chainsaw with an axe. Or possibly shooting it, depending on how close you are. But no matter what weapon you choose, there's always the possibility that it will fail, which is why you should always keep a backup nearby, like a book. Yep, books are dangerous. We've all heard of bookworms. But what about book javelin? Yep, people have figured out how to turn books into deadly projectiles. It takes some practice, but it can be done. And while it may not kill an opponent, it can certainly stun them long enough for you to get away. So next time you pick up a book, remember to read carefully. You never know what kind of trouble you might get into. Now check out Wackiest Unsolved Internet Mysteries or click this other video instead.